Welcome to this video on the Zenora channel. My name is Adisatguru, Buddha Rowabawan. In this video we're going to talk about forest fires. So as the climate change continues and progresses, as the temperature of the planet heats up, there are more and more forest fires every year. And this leaves society with the decisions about what to do to first try to limit these forest fires, contain them, and fight them once they're taking place. Right? So moving forward into the future, how can humanity address these forest fires and ensure that we are able to limit the impact of these forest fires on our societies, right? So there's different ways, different people, different thoughts about how to fight forest fires, okay, prevention or different ways to fight them once they've started, right? But the solution to forest fires is called the honey cell technique, the honey cell forest prevention method. Okay, so in indigenous cultures here in Canada, there's practices of controlled burns, where you burn a specific area in a controlled way so that it cannot be part of a larger fire, or so that it avoids a larger fire in that area in the future. Okay, so this is a traditional technique of indigenous people of the land. However, the indigenous people of the land did not have to deal with forest fires on a rate like we're having them right now when they were applying these techniques traditionally. So how do we address forest fires on a larger and larger scale now, and how do we limit their impact? Well, the technique, although it's not necessarily the most pretty technique, okay, it's a very effective technique. So it's the honey cell technique. So what you do is, let's say you have a huge forest, okay, and you look at it from above, okay, from an aerial view, and you see the whole forest. Then what you do is you grid on a map the whole forest in honey cells, right? And you calculate what are the most effective size of cells for that area. Obviously, you want there to be large enough cells so that the forest can still be maintained, right? And you create a grid out of that forest, and you divide it into honey cells. So you know how you have honey cells and they have their hexagonal shape, right? You divide it into honey cells, right? The whole forest, right? So the whole forest becomes divided into quarters, into units of forest, with a honey cell outline all through the forest. And then what you do is you take down the trees at the extremities of the honey cells. So you create units of forest within the greater forest. So what you do is you create corridors or boundaries between the separate units of the forest by using controlled burning, by taking down the trees in lines and straight lines with equipment. You essentially prepare the forests for forest fires. And then what you do is you give names to all the cells in the forest, right? Numbers, right? C, X, 4, 5, 6, whatever. That's that cell in the forest, tracked on the map. And that cell is now separated from the other cells of the forest by a space between the trees, by a cleared line, right? An outline, boundaries, without trees, in between the trees. So each cell is now individually a small forest within the larger forest. So what does this do? Well, from a visual look, from the sky, the whole forest looks like a cell of forest now, right? Some people might say that doesn't look pretty, but this is not the purpose to look pretty. This is the purpose to stop and fight forest fires. So now what happens is, if a forest fire starts within one of the cells of the greater, larger forest, it is blocked from growing to the rest of the forest by the honey cell technique, right? So there is now a boundary. If the fire grows, it can burn essentially its cell of forest, but it is stopped from transmitting to the other cells of the forest by a distance without trees in between the different cells. Okay? So in this way, when forest fires start in specific cells of the forest, they can be contained to that cell very, very easily. And even if, for example, for some reason, wind, it's not supposed to happen because there's enough distance between the trees and different cells, but let's say the fire was in multiple cells, you can establish a perimeter and fight them with this cell technique, right? You can now contain the fires within specific cells. And then when the forest burned down in that cell, if that happens, you rebuild that cell, you replant that cell. But the forest fire did not spread to the greater forest, did not go towards habitable lands where there's people, where there's homes. So you essentially recreate the outline of the forest into a cell, right? Like honey cells, all individual cells of forest within the greater forest, separated by controlled burn lines in between all the different cells. It's a vast project. It's a vast project. And it has to be maintained, those areas, right? In between the forests as new growths take place. It's a great way to create jobs, you know, because now we need a lot of people to maintain the forest and create this cell network, and it stops the forest fires in the future. So if we don't use these types of techniques to stop forest fires in the future, the forests are going to be decimated, homes will be decimated, the air quality will be bad every summer, we're going to have huge forest fires every summer, moving into the future, getting worse and worse and worse. So how do we address it? We solve it at the root. When a forest fire starts, it starts in a cell, and that cell is identified, the forest fighters go to that cell to fight the fire, and it is stopped from moving to the rest of the forest because the forest is now a honeycomb of forests. And the boundaries in between the individual honeycombs are expanses of land in between forests where there are no trees. So the fire cannot travel, even with the wind, from one forest cell to the next forest cell. Now, does this change the visual look of our forests? Yes, we'll get used to it, right? The cities have changed, the planet has changed, we have cities now, it has changed the look of our forests, of our lands. Well, the same for our forests, and we have to use strategic modeling to protect our forests moving into the future. So honey cell technique of fire prevention is the technique that is the most effective, as each cell of the forest can be defended and individually separated from other cells of the forest to prevent the spread of fire. Now, this is a technique that can be used, but society has to decide to use it, right? Do we really want to stop the fires, or do we want to fight them every year and have them decimate our forests and our lands and cause much, much damage financially to all our countries? Now, this goes everywhere in the world. The honey cell technique of forest division, right? In a world where we want to protect our forests, then we have to design our forests to be protected. Thank you for listening to this video on the Zen Art channel.